Well, okay then. It seems that we are live for the unbelievable episode number 50, the 50th episode of Space Rocks Uplink. I'm just about to bring Mark McCorkran in. Wow, Mark, how you doing? Lovely to see you. And so this is the 50th time.
It's amazing. Yeah, I mean, how have we got there, right? I mean, if you were to ask me to name all the groups of people that we've had on Uplink over the last year, I mean, it would take me a while to get anywhere close. It's remarkable, but thanks to everybody who's been watching for all of that time and following us along. And we've tried to expand the territory as much as possible. And we know that for some people, some subjects are more interesting than others. But that's good for us too. It keeps us engaged. That we don't, we can tread lots of ground here on Space Rocks.
Indeed, lots of ground to be trodden upon, certainly. And I guess what we should probably do is introduce ourselves briefly, because I gather we have a few new eyeballs out there in the ether. So, Mark, what's Space Rocks all about, and what do you do in your spare time?
Yes, I'm Mark McCorkran, and I'm the Senior Advisor for Science and Exploration at the European Space Agency. And sort of the day job is gathering together scientific results from all of our exciting missions in the solar system and looking at the universe beyond, and also from our human robotic exploration missions. So astronauts in the ISS, and then looking forward to going back to the moon, and also then going beyond to Mars with our robots first and then humans later. And gathering those results, talking to the scientific community, as I was doing earlier today, to general public audiences, but then also trying to find new ways of connecting between us and the outside world. And a lot of that is invested in Space Rocks, bringing together the space, the science, the engineering with the culture, music, film, writers, actors, people who play people on TV or in films, but are engaged in the world around them as well. And it's been great doing that with you for the last, let's not say how many years, a few live events that we managed to get done, some very big ones, and then of course because of the pandemic, moving into this for the time being at least, Uplink, as you say, 50th episode, amazing.
Indeed, and I suppose I should probably ask as well, because I guess I'm coming in from the music side, a bit of a music journalist background, you could say. The reason why these things collide is because I think space, the implications of space science, affect everybody, not just people who are interested in what's out there. And I think tonight's episode is really emblematic of that. We're being joined by two incredible guests. I mean, Joe, an incredibly accomplished Grammy-nominated artist, easily one of the heaviest, most brilliant live acts I've ever seen. Gojira, who I saw for the very first time when they played the UK, the very first time, and it literally rattled the people in the room. I mean, I'm not saying they were impressed. It looked like they were shaken because they didn't hear anything like it. But what's just as fascinating is that Joe is a compelling person, equally off stage as well. His concern for the environment, his desire to drive change and awareness, I think for a lot of people in the metal world is responsible for introducing them to organizations like Sea Shepherd and other initiatives that are really, you could say, taking the fight to the front line in a way that I think is necessary these days. And so that's a big deal. But I guess I want to turn to you, Mark, because you'll say better than I certainly could. What does space have to do with the oceans? And tell us a little bit about what Hayley does.
Yeah, so I just wanted to point out very quickly, Sea Shepherd is an organization that is very good also at this kind of multidimensional outreach. I've met some of the people at Sea Shepherd at a science fiction convention. They're hooked in there. Hayley is an ocean scientist. She works for EUMETSAT, which is an organization that effectively meteorology, looking at the weather, but the weather of course is driven by much more the stuff, the clouds and the sky above us is driven by many other factors in the environment. And the oceans, we live on an ocean planet after all, the majority of this planet is covered by oceans, is a huge part of what drives our weather. So at EUMETSAT, there in Darmstadt, very close to our European Space Operations Center, where we fly our space missions, EUMETSAT has its office, and they do science there. So they're also researching into the way that the ocean is part of this big ecosystem, this big living planet that we all inhabit. And the European Space Agency, of course, for all that it has exploration missions going outwards, looking at our solar system, looking at the universe around us, we have a big fleet of missions, Earth observation missions, looking down. And we do that in partnership with the European Commission, the famous Sentinel missions as part of our Copernicus program. And those are handed off. The data responsibility is given over to EUMETSAT for some of those satellites, and they build that into their scientific work and make those data available to the world. So for all that people tend to think of, human beings putting boots on things or probes visiting comets billions of kilometers away, a crucial part of what we do is focused on the planet we live on and trying to understand how it's changing. And of course, it's changing very rapidly.
Indeed it is. And without further ado, we're going to bring in two incredibly important voices. And I suppose this is what Space Rocks is all about. We've called it a bit of an atomic collider. In many ways it is. And we're definitely going to be throwing some ideas together as well. All right, we have Hayley and Joe. Joe, how you doing? Great to see you. Are you receiving?
Hi, man. Good to see you. How are you?
Delighted to see you. Welcome. And Hayley, how are you? Are you receiving okay?
I am. Hi, Alex. Hi, Mark. Hi, Joe. Good to see you.
Pleasure to see you both. Pleasure to meet you, Joe, and to see you again, Hayley. This is your third time. You're now the record holder on Space Rocks Uplink, and it's a pleasure to have you on for the first time, Joe. Great to meet you.
Thank you very much for having me. Thanks. And nice to meet you, Mark and Hayley. How are you?
Well, thank you.
Good. Yeah. Whereabouts are you this evening, Joe? Because Hayley and I, we were just thinking we should give up this chat this evening and go for a nice bicycle ride because it's it's good weather here in Europe. But where are you?
I was on the beach just a few minutes ago with my wife and kids. We're renting a house in the southwest of France on the Atlantic coast, and I'm here for a few more weeks, and then I go back to the States in New York where I live.
Okay, tough life on the beach. We have one really nearby. Yeah. We have one 5 kilometers away. I think I've been there twice in the last year, but I should go.
Yeah, I know how it is. When you live close to the beach, you're happy to be close to the ocean, and somehow you feel it, but you never go.
Yeah. Well, maybe at the end of this discussion, because this evening, of course, that's what it's all about. This evening, big focus on that. I should just go and apparently we have some. Bioluminescence in the sea here at the moment as well. So if I go up there when it's dark, you can see all the little bugs on the lighting up the ocean, which is a fantastic phenomenon.
Wait, I'm sorry. Where are you? On what planet are you?
I'm on planet Netherlands, so I'm just 5 kilometers inland from the Dutch coast.
Wow. Okay.
And it has this weird name in Dutch. It's called zeefonk. So sort of sea funk. Hayley, tell us more about, because these are also traces of the environment, right? This bioluminescent stuff. It's a little bit related to the stuff behind me in this picture. This is algae in the Baltic.
Exactly that. It was something I studied quite a lot during my PhD, and it's absolutely incredible to see. It's these plankton that are ubiquitous all throughout the oceans of the world. And when you get enough of them and you sort of stimulate them either through waves or if you go diving and at night and you sort of wave your hands around in front of you, you can see them start lighting up. It's this reaction that they get when they're stimulated. But when you get these big blooms of them, like in the picture behind Mark, you can get these really spectacular sort of flashes as waves crash on the shore. And there's a really great video of some guys, I think it's in California, surfing in one of these, which is possibly not a good idea because sometimes they can be toxic, but it looks really awesome as their surfboards are streaking through. There's this big flash of blue light behind them, and it's pretty amazing to see. Really cool stuff.
Indeed, and I suppose this is one of the fascinating things about ocean exploration, right? It's just that there's so much that we still don't know. And yet, Hayley, as an ocean scientist, I have to ask you, especially this of all weeks, I see that the G7 are talking and there's lots of news coming out of it. And I read that they're anticipating that we'll be losing about 8.5 trillion in about 30 years time or whatever else. But to put it in different terms, from your perspective, how worried should we be?
Pretty worried, I think, is probably the way to say it. We're really into sort of uncharted territory when it comes to the changes that we're putting on our planet's systems, right? And the ocean is one of the biggest parts of that whole system, if you like. And we're really pushing it beyond what it's ever experienced in sort of geological history. There's more carbon dioxide more rapidly going into the atmosphere. The ocean's absorbing more of that more than it ever has. It's causing it to heat up faster than it probably ever has. Overfishing, pollution, all of this, ocean acidification, all of these different issues really is a huge amount of pressure on a system. And the oceans are big and they're absorbing a lot of this. And I think historically we've had this kind of idea that there are these endless voids, but that's probably not really helped us in terms of how we've treated it. So yeah, there's a lot to worry about.
So Joe, if I can jump in there, you're very well known, of course, as a heavy metal musician, but you're also very well known for your environmental concerns. Where did that come from? What is this? I mean, in a sense, I suppose everybody should be concerned. It's no surprise that people are concerned, but in fact, many people seem not to be. So why for you? Where the big push?
Well, where I am right now is where I grew up. From age 0 to 30, I lived here in it's a small community surrounded by woods, far away from big cities. And the only occupation here is to go on the beach. So a lot of people surf. I was surfing a little bit when I was a kid, but mostly I was just going on the beach because it's the best place to be, and it's wonderful to be near the ocean. But first of all, seeing the beach in the winter covered with plastic is a very, very disturbing experience. And it was this way all year round, except in the summer when everybody would come on a vacation. Then in the morning, they would clear the main beaches. So most tourists wouldn't realize the damage that we're doing on our oceans. But the people that live here, they see it in the winter. All sorts of things, car parts and boat parts and shampoo bottles and rusty cans and needles and straws and you name it. And a lot of fishing gear as well on the beach. And also we would come home sometimes with our feet covered with oil. I don't know exactly where it comes from, but probably from boats illegally releasing their dirty oils and stuff in all the fishermen and a lot of trash coming from Spain too. Believe it or not, they have less regulations there. I believe, at least at the time when I was growing up, there was a lot of Spanish written on the bottle, so it came from Spain because I'm really close to the border, the Spanish border, and the Gulf Stream is hitting the southwest before bouncing back towards the UK, I believe. So that would take all the trash from Spain and bring it to us, to our shore. But it's not just Spain, it was just close. And we would have stuff from across the ocean too, some exotic trees and tree trunks. So for me, it was fascinating to go through all that mess, but I couldn't understand why all this plastic was on the beach. And I was asking my mom why the earth is so big. How come if there's all this plastic here, what does it mean? What is in the ocean? And my brother, who was surfing a lot, had many infections in his ears. As a kid, there was a lot of complications because of the pollution in the water. And sometimes there would be alerts to surfers to not go surf because it was too dangerous. There would be this red flag. And yet there was no waves, but they would explain to us that it's because of the pollution in the water. So all of that was very disturbing. Being hypersensitive, I think, sort of. I'm hyperactive / hypersensitive, so it's my life is a bit complicated. But so witnessing all that had a tremendous impact on me, and I accumulated anger, towards humanity and towards the polluters. Yeah, and then I'm thinking a lot, and I didn't study. I'm not a scientist. I didn't do really well in school. I wasn't able to pay attention. I was dreaming all the time, so I didn't study much. But as an artist, and I have a sensibility, and I believe scientists and artists should work together to spread the message. So I'm really glad that you guys put this together. I'm a little lost here. I don't know what's going on. I'm usually doing metal interviews exclusively. So But yes, I'm happy to report that yeah, as a kid we were very, very shocked, and it always sticked with me. Other kids cared less, I believe, so that's where the sensitive part kicks in. So very quickly I would round up some friends and go to the beach with gloves and plastic bags and gather trash, and then display it on the parking lot with a sign saying permanent exhibition or something like that. We even one time we had an article in the local newspaper saying that we were what's the word, not terrorists, but like we were the problem. Oh, who are these vandals putting trash on the parking lot? But it shows how people see things. The problem is not the parking lot. The problem is the oceans and the earth in general.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you mentioned this, Joe, because yes, it's not your traditional metal interview, but I guess that's why I think, as you say, I think these things are so important, is breaking down those barriers and communicating these ideas, and also communicating the kind of data, that is inarguably, it is there. We are seeing this change. It is undeniable. And I guess that's why it's so important to have people like you who have done what you have done. Now, I mean, in the years that I have known you, there's perhaps no closer association that I think you have than with Sea Shepherd, because I wholly believe that there are so many people, both in your audience and in the wider community of music that you represent, they know about Sea Shepherd because of what you have done, because of that advocacy and so on. And I think it really has caused, positive, change there, because it's that kind of advocacy that we really need. Was it as easy to communicate the ideas in the beginning as perhaps it is now, as more people have taken up the cause?
People would call us hippies, at the beginning when we were talking about the earth and the environment, and now a lot less, I noticed. I feel I think people feel the emergency more than ever now to do something, yet they don't know where to start. They think it's about voting. I think it's about personal actions. That's what I'm trying to communicate through my lyrics. But I remember clearly when I was maybe 12, 13, thinking that, okay, it's, scientists are raising their voice about this, and they're how do you say, raising the alarm? Is that how you say?
Yeah.
Pulling the... and I thought, okay, we're good then. If scientists say we need to do something, it means everybody's listening and we all going to do the right things. And in 10 years, we'll be back to normal. But unfortunately, it didn't go that way. And I even feels like we took a step forward. And this is beyond just environmental problems. It's also human rights violations and all these things. Lately, for the last decade, has been pretty bad in terms of leaders of superpowers. I mean, I really felt in a way that we were taking a big step back. But in other ways, in many other ways, we're also evolving and going the right direction. So it's hard to see what's what. It's not just all bad. Of course, thanks to people like you and other people and fighters and activists. The new generation is more aware of the problems and so on, but it's so slow. I wish it could go faster. The general, the big decisions and the treaties and all that, it should go faster. I don't know.
So Hayley, let me bring you back in, because I think Joe's picked on two very important issues here. One is the out of sight, out of mind issue, right? It's in the oceans. I mean, it's not there. Put it in the parking lot, it suddenly becomes a problem. But hey, it's not the parking lot. And the flip side, the other thing is that it's happening. Climate change and the acidification of the ocean, all of the issues are happening just slowly enough that people can put them behind, oh, well, I'll ignore it this year. Oh, it's a little bit warmer than last year, but then there's a cold snap, and the time scales are just sort of wrong. It's the anti-Goldilocks effect, right? It's just not happening quite quickly enough to be a disaster, but it's happening quickly enough that we really are seeing the changes in our life. So how do you, as somebody who works scientifically in this, how do we advocate in a way that makes it local? Because Joe has this experience. It happened on my beach. Most people don't live on a beach, right? So what's been your approach to this?
Yeah, it's really difficult. You're completely right. The oceans are not this for a lot of people, especially like you say, if you don't live near the coast. I mean, I don't anymore. You don't feel the connection to the sea necessarily. You might feel the connection to the bit that's right next to where you live, and we draw on that a lot. You know, people who have experiences of the sea, of the places they've been on holiday, of the beach. You know, you can draw on that, but it is really hard to get them to care about, you know, things in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, because that feels a million miles away from everybody's day-to-day experiences. And on the other point you made there, it's also a million miles away from most people's priorities, because, you know, people are, and completely rightly so, worried about, especially at the moment, making their mortgage, their job, you know, their kids going to school, all of these things. And you think, oh, this thing of climate change is just this thing I don't feel like I can do much about, and it's happening over there. The ways we're trying to, you know, get around that is to bring data, compelling arguments, compelling stories to people in ways that they understand. Music is one avenue that's fantastic for this. And, you know, as I think Joe said earlier, I really advocate for scientists to work with musicians, artists, and other people, because there are things we just can't explain with data to get that connection for people. You know, they're more likely to understand things at a more visceral level from hearing it in a way that speaks to them. And music's fantastic for this. You know, like the sounds of ice melting are quite terrifying if you hear them. You know, and most people don't, because none of us live really in the Arctic. So we have to kind of bring those kind of things to bear. And, you know, making the connections between things that are everyday life. You know, what happens in those blooms we were talking about before affects, you know, the seafood you can eat at the restaurant at the weekend. Or, you know, it really, I mean, the air you're breathing, all of these kind of things. So people understand the roles that something very distant like the ocean has sort of every second of every day in their lives. It's a challenge, but, you know, when we're finding, I guess, ever more creative ways to meet. And that's one of the things I enjoy most about my job, is trying to come up with these creative ways and work with diverse people to do so.
So let me take a step back for a second then to try, because I was just reading in the paper just before we came on that the National Geographic have just finally sort of declared that we now have 5 oceans, not 4, by, you know, picking the Atlantic, the Arctic, the Indian, and the Pacific, the famous 4. But now we're going to talk about the Southern Ocean, which is ringed around Antarctica. And again, that's something very much out of sight, out of mind. Unless you live in Tierra del Fuego or in one of the, you know, remote islands in the south, Antarctica is just a place where explorers go, or the occasional weird scientist spends their time. But it's a critical piece of the overall environment. We've seen these big icebergs carving off the glaciers now with increasing rates. And some people, you know, my friend Jonathan Amos gets very excited about this and covers it in the news. But it should be scary that we're seeing these huge icebergs carving off Antarctica. So tell us a little bit about the Southern Ocean and why that's such a critical part, even though it's distant from us and remote from us.
Yeah, I mean, it's really big, right? So, I mean, the whole ocean is really big, but of the oceans, this is one of the kind of biggest parts. And, you know, those polar regions are kind of, in terms of the ocean and climate system, these areas where there's a lot of very complex but very, very important processes happening. Ice is one of those things. You know, the melting of ice changes sea level. The melting of ice also changes what we call the albedo of our planet, so how much light is being reflected back, and that affects the temperature as well. So it's involved in all these complex feedbacks. In the Arctic and the Antarctic, you get these formations of what we call deep water in the ocean, these big conveyor belt systems that move like huge volumes of water and thus heat around our planet. And if you change how much ice is melting, you can turn on and off those kind of systems. So the Southern Ocean, as well as our northern polar regions, are really places where a lot of these tipping points potentially stand to be tripped by our current activities. And that's where some of our greatest uncertainties lie in understanding what happens in the future. A lot of things depend on how fast does this happen? You know, what if this big ice sheet collapses? What does that do to sea level? So, you know, it's a really vitally important area for us to understand. And, you know, as you say, it's far away from all of us. It's far away even from the scientists too. So few of us get to go there to study it even. And that's why, you know, things like satellites are super, super important for helping us to monitor what's going on in those regions.
Right.
And so I wondered, I mean, if we could, shift for a moment from sea to the Amazon, just again, yet another thing that is for many people, out of sight and out of mind. I mean, Joe, so much of your music channels the kind of rage, about what is happening, about this sort of feeling of helplessness, as we see the world, I guess just being relentlessly damaged and all that. Tell us a little bit about the shift from, creatively, but also just like addressing the Amazon, because you had tremendous success with Amazonia, right? With your fundraising and awareness campaign and so on. I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about that, because I think this is so important when we have people who are at the spear point of, arts, music, and so on, who are willing to go and do this. Tell us a little bit about that campaign, because the last time you and I spoke, you were at the very beginning of it all, but now it sounds like it really caught fire.
Yes, yeah. Well, it's always the same feeling we have. We feel helpless. It feels like we can't do anything. Like most of us, in our everyday life, we don't know how to tackle things, and we see terrible images of the Amazon burning or children dying of hunger, and these images are overwhelming. We feel like we can't do anything, so we just go by with our lives and try not to look too hard. But once in a while, especially while writing an album, we feel a sense of responsibility, and we need a purpose in our lives. The band members, we feel like having a band and being successful is good, but if we don't use it for something else, then it's going to go to waste somehow. So it's also in a way selfish. I've been using that word a lot, talking about this. This is so weird. I'm not very good at selling what I do, but in a way, I want to say it's selfish. It's not the right word, but it makes me feel good to do something that brings something positive to any kind of situation. And when we saw the Amazon burning, was it 2 years ago or a year and a half ago? We were writing songs, so we wrote a song about the Amazon, and then that brought the idea of, okay, when we release the song, we need to do something and use that momentum when people are going to pay attention to the song because they're following the band, or maybe because they just like that song, and they are going to be touched, they're going to feel something. Let's use that small window that we have to offer them a way to act and to do something. So then from that moment, it was all about connecting with the right people. A little bit like we did with Sea Shepherd when we released a song back in 2010, raising awareness about the oceans. The song was called Of Blood and Salt, and we released it for free. But then we were going to do an EP that never came out due to technical problems, but it's still somewhere and I'm still sort of working on it. But anyway, the goal was to bring light on Sea Shepherd at this moment, for example. So then I wanted to find people that are active in the Amazon and are doing something for against the deforestation. And that brought me immediately to the problem of indigenous people, that on a human level, that's what we need to tackle and empower these communities that live within the forest and send them a message that they're not alone and that we feel concerned about their situation in the forest in general. So that was the idea. I was lucky enough to know some great people in New York, activists, Brazilian activists that live in New York, that helped me to get in touch with leaders of Amazonian tribes. And I finally met with Sonia Gojira, who's a famous leader of all the Amazon tribes. She ran for president in 2018 as an act of rebellion, or like to draw attention on the subject, on the problem of indigenous people. And it was very, very, very powerful to talk to someone that you would usually see on the news, so to speak, for us, for a bunch of white boys from France. It was very powerful to be directly in touch with indigenous people from the Amazon. So it was very inspiring. we had a few ideas. We did two things. We did a donation. We asked our fans to donate simply through our website, and by donating, they were entering a raffle where they could win something, a guitar and a snare, and then we asked a bunch of famous artists that we became friends with or that we just toured with to donate an instrument. Slash gave a guitar and a hat. Slash of Guns N' Roses. Metallica, Deftones, Korn, Mastodon, all these great bands, all donated immediately. Nobody said no to that. And it made me think, it's incredible. If all it takes sometimes is somebody who's bringing people together, creates a platform, create connections, and then things are possible. And it could go faster. So in the end, we raised $300,000, which is, it's a drop in the ocean in a way, but it's not ridiculous, and it's really doing things. They are currently buying land. The Guarani Kiowa tribe in Mato Grosso in the southern part of Brazil is actually buying land to replant trees and to be able to live there and hopefully thrive. And they're building also healing houses. That was a plan. They exposed what they needed, what were there, and what kind of money they needed. So the original amount was $75,000, and it was sort of a challenge for us to gather that money, and especially in the midst of the pandemic. And we managed to do 4 times, maybe a little less than 4 times that, which was incredible. So it was very inspiring experience that confirmed something that I thought, is that it needs to come from individuals, the change that we all need to survive on this planet. I don't think we can count on governments only. I mean, if they do something, that's great, but we can't wait on them. I think we need to take action individually, even if it's small drops on the ocean, but the entire ocean is made of drops. So.
It's interesting, Joe, because I remember seeing an interview with Paul Watson, of course, from Sea Shepherd, of course, is formerly of Greenpeace. And he basically said, well, look, it's important to influence policy, but someone's got to do something about the extermination of whales right now, because we can't wait 30 years. And I suppose this is the thing that really interests me, because it's the question of time scale, right? At the start of the chat, it's talked about this news coming out of the G7 summit. They could be losing up to $5 trillion a year by the year 2050, right? 2050 feels like a long way off, because it feels like we should have been doing things 40 years ago. And so it's interesting how there is this disjuncture. And in the course of this pandemic, I remember very well at the start, it was a small headline, because of course, this horrible plague was the main thing. People began to see the reduction of emissions over Milan, if I recall correctly, because everybody had locked down, and suddenly they saw this thing. And then it almost became a bit of a joke online. Oh, something has happened and nature is healing, But it was startling how quickly there seemed to be this regression. I wondered, Hayley, if I could just, direct you, what did that signify? Were there misconceptions about it all? Because my worry is that people think this is something we can just flick a switch on and sort of fix. There's sci-fi talking about terraforming. People see images like that. Maybe the takeaway is a bit too optimistic. Is there a problem in that, and people thinking that this is just something we're just going to reverse somehow?
Yeah, a bit. I think you're right. I mean, there are certainly things we can do that we can change quite quickly, and those are things to be positive about. I mean, like you say, things like the emissions, we can really, you can see we did it already this year, cut them down quite quickly by doing certain things. But we do have certain things that are already baked into the system. And the oceans are kind of one part where this is particularly true. Since basically the Industrial Revolution, and since we've been releasing like these excess kind of greenhouse gases more than the Earth typically cycles, the ocean has already absorbed a whole load of things, right? So actually the system is already primed, and it will take many, many years for that to all work through. So we've kind of baked in a certain amount of warming, of ocean acidification, etc. already, which is difficult because there's nothing really we can do about that. I mean, there are these kind of big, crazy engineering ideas, and there's some validity in some of those, with the caveat of what we do, we have to check we don't overdo, if you see what I mean. There's always consequences to these actions, whether we put a big space mirror up or we drop loads of iron in the ocean, all these different ideas people have come up with to try and sort of geoengineer our way out of these problems. We do have to be careful we don't create more. And I'm not against the idea of us trying to do things that are innovative and help, but with a great degree of caution. I think we have to be very, very careful about that.
Mm-hmm.
So, Joe, if you come back, to the music industry a minute, I mean, you're clearly, an incredibly good representative of what can be done. But the industry as a whole, and in fact the entertainment industry as a whole, is being provocative here, is in some ways designed to distract us from the realities. It's designed to be a moment where we can kind of forget about the drudgery of work and the problems we have, and go and kind of experience human communion and ecstasy, and then it's all over, and we go back to our work again. So the music business is obviously going to change now because of the pandemic, and it has done over the last 18 months. But where do you see things as live events start again? Can musicians and the music industry, more importantly, can you make a difference? Because the influence you have is enormous if it's channeled positively, and you're a representative of that, but you're part of a much bigger industry.
That's a good question. I know it's difficult to answer. I think you mentioned entertainment, but art, it's also art. It's also, you learn a lot from Molière or the great writers, right? Because there's a moral, or there's a strong idea, and art can also inspire and entertain at the same time. But that's the ultimate goal, We want our fans to have fun at the shows and bang their heads and and shout, but also to feel something here. There's a sort of an emotional platform where we can reach people and make things happen. When there's an album that I really like, it makes my life better. I listen to it over and over, and it sort of makes room for thoughts and ideas and inspiration. So if we can, plant a seed every time somebody is, listening to a song about, we had a song called Toxic Garbage Island. It's about the Great Pacific Patch. And so people are wondering, what is he talking about? So then they research, and then because they respect the band, they're going to, dig a little more. Maybe it's going to take a few months. Maybe it's going to take a few years. Maybe it's going to take one day. One of these people showing this song to somebody who doesn't know the band and say, "Oh yeah, I know what he's talking about." So he's putting the word out there and putting some ideas and planting seeds, I think, and then pray for rain so the seeds would grow. Basically.
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing you said there is very important, and I misspoke in a way. We shouldn't. There is an industry which is linked to the music, but the music itself is the art form, and how. But people need to eat, and people need to have. You need to survive. Yeah. Nobody's. Well, I don't know if there are any great artists these days who have rich from birth and have become great artists without compromising to the industry. But it's there, right, for most people. Yeah, I think that's really important. I mean, and that artistic side, that inspirational side, is indeed what pulls us in. We're not interested in the industry, right? And we, in fact, the opposite. It's ripping us off at some level, right?
But it's interesting what you're talking about the industry in general. It's a bittersweet feeling to be a touring band, like us, because we, as kids, we were full of illusions. We would listen to albums and look at the booklets of the CDs or the cassette, and look at the one picture of the band we have access to, and we imagine things. They must be having such a blast all the time. And then when you become a professional, you never really reach that point where you have a blast all the time, and you end up touring half of the year and not seeing your family, and things are hard. So when you live the dream, it's not a dream anymore, and then you have to make a new dream. I mean, the reality is a little brutal, and the industry wants that, but you're in or you're out. You know what I mean? Like you have to sort of play the game. And on that note, I've been asked many times on interviews, so you have a message, environmental message, but yet you tour on a tour bus, and you have AC, and then you take planes, and so what about that? And at first I was a bit confused and I didn't know what to answer. And I don't want to justify that, but the day, we can rent a bus that doesn't pollute, we'll be the first ones to do it. But for now, our choice is to disappear completely from the cultural landscape or to be part of it. I don't think jumping off a boat that's going to sink is going to solve the problem. I mean, if you're already in there, part of this big machinery, it's important to communicate, to talk, and to try to fix things, and to without being completely radical and refusing to take a plane, for example, because we believe that our message has, in the end, more impact than just withdrawing from the traffic, so to speak.
Yeah, this was an argument labelled against Al Gore, wasn't it, for his climate change film maybe 10 years ago, flying around the world to promote not flying. Well, as you say, you've got to be, if you just remove yourself completely, you can't change anything, unless we all remove ourselves, at which point...
Unless we do that, simultaneously all together, that would be wonderful, but but we can't stop progress. We just have to make it better and rethink the way we consume and the way we use the resources of the earth. And because I heard in a very interesting podcast, Vsauce, I don't know if you're familiar with Vsauce, but the guy says that if you would gather the whole humanity in a herd, really all together, shoulder to shoulder, we would cover a surface like Los Angeles or something like that, a big city, not even a country. So if you would gather all humans together and pack them tight, it's not that many humans on the planet. It's our ways that are too crazy. So there is room for everybody. Yeah. When you take a plane or a train, you see a lot of empty landscapes everywhere.
Absolutely, but change is possible. Brian Eno, is very involved in the environmental movement as well. I mean, it has a thing that he always cites is you've just got to get in the arena. You might have people jeering at you, but you still have to go and do it. But it's interesting though, because there are things linked with climate change and this crisis. If somebody told me 10 years ago that I could go to my local supermarket and there would be a big long aisle full of vegan products, I'd have said that they were completely mad, right? But now look at where we are. And now we know that there are certain trades that are very linked with emissions, very linked with depletion of the Amazon, and so on. And change is possible. It might not seem, it's almost imperceptibly slow, I think, as Mark said. But something I wanted to address is actually, it's coming up in the chat a little bit, and all ideas welcome, because this is a forum for debate. This is space rocks, right? Why can't we just go to Mars? I mean, I follow Elon Musk. We're just going to do that, right? So we've messed up Earth. We're just going to go make a second planet. We've got one that's right there. So why are we so worried about this? Why can't we just go and do that?
Let me pick that up as the person that I guess I'm wearing a polo shirt to do with exploring the universe today. I'm not wearing one of my Mars ones. Look, nothing we do to the planet Earth, nothing, as bad as it gets, will ever be as bad a place as Mars is to live, right? I mean, Mars is deeply, deeply against you as a human being. It has really got it in for you. I mean, the only other planet, probably terrestrial planet in the solar system that's got it in for you even more is Venus. You really don't want to go there. But Mars looks superficially attractive, but there's no oxygen to breathe. There's very little water. There is some underground. There's radiation sleeting from the sky. This idea that we can escape our responsibilities here and go to another planet and set up. I mean, we screwed this one up badly, so who's to say we won't get it right? We won't get it equally wrong in this other place with nothing to start from. So, I prefer to focus our attention on how we can use the space data and the way that we analyze the world we live in from above to try to make this connected system. And this is what Hayley does and the people with our Copernicus satellites, and the weather satellites and the science satellites. So Hayley, give us a little bit of insight there into, how do we view the world holistically? It's not just the oceans, it's the atmosphere, it's the winds, it's all of those things. Give us a bit of a sense about how we can measure this world and then make that actionable. I think that's the question.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, a lot of the satellite kind of tech has its roots in sort of space exploration. So people always view space exploration as kind of this great blue sky thing, and it is, and but it has had so many practical spin-offs that have helped us understand what's going on Earth at the moment, and the satellites are just one particular way. And we have now this hugely diverse fleet of Earth observation satellites, more than we've ever had, that can monitor all the different complexities of the system, so that we can put all those puzzle pieces together and figure out exactly what's going on. I mean, there's one behind me. This is Sentinel-6. This is one of our newest ones. We launched late last year. This one measures the sea surface height. So for sea level rise, this is what we're using, along with a fleet of other ones we've had in history to track what's going on with the sea level rise. But we've got other ones that will take profiles of data through the atmosphere, so we can understand what's happening with temperature, with moisture and water vapor, with the different greenhouse gases, for example. We've got ones that can image at high resolution the land use changes. We've got ones that can detect ships, so we can look at things like illegal fishing and unregulated activities there. Really, we've got all the data we really need to monitor the Earth system in ways that we have only dreamed about, I guess, up to now. Things like the Copernicus program, like you say, really are these eyes on Earth that allow us to address all these different problems that we face. So yeah, this is one of the things that gives me hope for the future. One of the reasons I'm in the industry I'm in is you see the amazing things we can achieve when we put our minds to it, and the incredible tools we can come up with to address these problems. And they're making real practical differences to people's lives. Obviously we can observe all the things that are going on with climate change, but we can also come up with ways to mitigate things. We can choose the areas we should be protecting so that we get the most protection for our ecosystems. And we can, like I say, look at things like protecting from illegal fishing, illegal activities that threaten our biodiversity. All of this with these amazing technologies that we have now in space.
Yeah. So the question then for both of you actually is the same one, because we can do that. We can be activists. We can gather the data, but there's clearly a bottleneck, and that runs through politicians and through the general population. I mean, just yesterday there was this, laughable example of an American politician asking the Bureau of Land and Management, can we not solve climate change by changing the orbit of the Earth? Could you look into that for us, please, and move the Earth a bit further away from the sun? And what was strange about it for me was not only that this is a senior politician who is representing constituents and is in charge of money dispersal, but the civil servant from the Bureau of Land Management turned around and said, well, I'll have to look into that one for you, sir. Instead of saying, in some polite way, you're an idiot.
Yeah.
We can have all the data that we can ever possibly need to understand this, but we've got to make it actionable. And if politicians aren't willing to engage, if the public, for different reasons, not for venal reasons, just because it's too scary or I've got other things to deal with, how do we get through that bottleneck? I'd be interested to hear both of you on that. So Joe, give us a start there.
It's hard for me to answer that because I'm a bit on the edge, to be perfectly transparent with you all, between despair and hope. And I was always, by nature, very hopeful and positive and outraged, but we're gonna make it, we can do this. And now I'm at a time in my life where I'm not so sure, but I choose by default to be optimistic. But when it comes to politics, I don't know. When I was a kid, I had an impression that there was grown-ups in the world that were taking care of things. And now I'm a grown-up, and I think to myself, where are the grown-ups? Where are they? What's going on? Look at the presidents, talking, trying to be reelected and making sure they look good on camera and trying to say the right things to be reelected. It just troubles me. I don't know. I don't have, but I hope Hayley has an answer to that question of the bottleneck.
I can try. I certainly share your feeling, Joe, about looking for the grown-ups. Like, where are they? So surely somebody has control of this ship, and it doesn't seem that they do. It's like, oh gosh, it's us now, isn't it? And I guess that's it. It is us now. So we have to try and, I kind of think to myself, we have to have the strength, and I guess the title of your album, really, Fortitude, is the one for this, right? You have to have the strength to have these uncomfortable conversations. The politician there is and the civil servant is an example. How do you've got to have these conversations where you say, this is ridiculous. We really need to do something different here. We need to try another way, but you've got to do it in a way that doesn't completely turn people off and, you know, takes into account all the complexities of what's going on. I mean, I've worked in South Africa for a long time, and we'd have really difficult conversations with people a lot of the time about things like, you know, climate change, because the country was very underdeveloped, and they were like, well, why shouldn't we burn the coal that we have? You know, we need to develop like the rest of the world has. And it's really hard to say they shouldn't. You know, they definitely should. So, you know, these are uncomfortable conversations to have, but we need to come up with alternatives that are, you know, innovative and suitable for purpose, but also have these uncomfortable conversations where we're going to have conflicts, where there's going to be different priorities that we need to balance. And that's hard, really, really hard. But I don't think the answer is ever taking ourselves out of the situation. We've touched on that a couple of times this evening. You know, you have to be in the arena to have this fight. So that will in some ways necessitate some compromise. But, you know, I think we're really innovative. We're really clever as a species. I mean, you look at the amazing scientific achievements we've made in the last year with medical technology and things like that, and with our satellites, our space tech, you know, I'm constantly blown away by what we can do. Yeah. So I think, yeah, a mix of that innovation and some grit to try and keep going and keep having these conversations is what we need.
So Mark, why can't we change the orbit? No, I'm joking.
Well, you know, the weird thing, right? No, I'm not. I don't want to go there too deep. But what's interesting about this is that it's actually a little bit more subtle, because the moon is moving away from the Earth. Orbits do change, and I think a little bit of information can then be very non-linear in the sense that it runs away. Say, well, if the moon's moving away, why can't we actively push the Earth further away? But that non-linearity can be used in the other direction, right? By illustrating some of the problems and having a demonstration, something, you know, what Joe did on the beach locally, take the trash out of this place and put it here. You can influence people's minds. I mean, you might piss them off. You might actually make them angry that you've done this. My car can't park anymore. But maybe you trigger that thought in people. And my sort of answer to this is maybe we need to take the politicians out of this a bit, because look, in the end, we are the people. I mean, and you know, Joe's from a country which is, you know, pretty good at revolutions, right? And maybe somehow we need another one. It needs to come from the people. Hopefully, it doesn't end up with so many people with their heads chopped off. But frankly, if we don't do that, we are going to have all of those problems in spades, right? If we don't actually come together and compromise, and some of us suffer. I mean, you know, those of us who live in the West, who are privileged enough to be able to do this evening, while other people are having much harder lives, maybe our lifestyle will have to change. But if we don't do it, it will change, and it will change way for the worse for all of us, right? And I for me, I mean, Joe's at that, he's younger, of course, you know, you're at that age where you begin to see this. I've seen this for a while. My kids are now, you know, nearly 20 or so. I'm not particularly scared for myself, but I'm scared for them, right? What world am I leaving for them? And, you know, you have a new baby, Hayley, right? I mean, that's the thought which goes through every parent's mind now, right? Is what is the world that we're leaving? And that's what fires me up, because I feel guilty that I'm giving them a world which my generation wasn't responsible with. So yeah, it's scary times.
Well, isn't this? I mean, look. I mean, I guess with big problems, like any project, no one owns the solution, because there are so many different things that need to sort of change and move in a direction. And isn't one of them? It's not about having enough data or enough awareness. All those things are kind of out there. The conduits are there. It's how we see ourselves. Maybe the real issue, maybe the fundamental one, or at least one of them that has to change, is how we actually see ourselves, not as inhabitants, but as custodians, you know. And I suppose, you know, not to get too, you know, into like the metaphysics of all of this, but isn't part of the issue that everybody is looking to acquire enough to achieve happiness in their own lifespan? I mean, science fiction is full of ideas about generational shifts, where basically a ship leaves, it's traveling so slowly through the cosmos that only successive generation after generation after generation will occupy the ship, and then it's 20 generations away that's going to get to that far distant thing. In a way, it's almost as though we should be looking at ourselves in the same way, don't you think? Maybe looking at humans at our own lifespans is just one link in a very long chain. I mean, I suppose parenthood does that, but I kind of see that as an issue as well, and I put it to the floor, because I just don't see things changing until we start seeing ourselves differently as well.
Yeah, there's something quite inherent in science about of this feeling, right? It's one of the things I really like about science is that you stand on the shoulders of the previous generations, and what you do echoes into the future. The same way if you're involved in education, the same way, you know, if you raise good kids as well, and that is something that brings me a lot of hope. But you do have to have that kind of it's an ethical thing. It's almost like a semi-spiritual thing, I guess, is the closest I can think of to it. You know, this feeling of care for things that you will never perceive. You know, especially if you're not particularly religious and you don't think there's future lives or anything like that. I mean, I still feel that quite strongly as a scientist. Perhaps it is part of the career, but I think you're right, Alex. The more we can have that kind of mindset, the more we'll realize the consequences of our actions now aren't just now. You know, there are these things that will affect people in the future.
Yes, it seems as there's a veil on the future, and we can't see. There's several scenarios that could happen. There's the ideal scenario with, you know, a massive change in our societies, which you see what happened with the pandemic. Nations organized, you know, lockdowns and masks and new rules and regulations so quickly, and people got used to a new life within 1 year. People started to have different reflexes and different thoughts about how they would go by, you know, their day, and I think we're able to adapt and change. It's true, but often it takes a big catastrophe or something really, really severe for everybody to change. But who knows? Yeah, maybe it's possible. I definitely choose to believe that we're gonna make it. Like you said, it's something spiritual, and well, I was wondering, where are the grown-ups? Well, there's 3 grown-ups in front of me. That is it.
I was just thinking, though, because you mentioned your Brazilian experience, the Amazon rainforest. I mean, that you must have had these similar conversations, right? That people are custodians of the forest that they live in and we used to be like that. All civilizations could not have survived when in earlier times in Europe or wherever else, right? The people on the land of present day North America, you know, they were custodians of that land, and we've forgotten that. And I think that's a really important point that you raised there, Hayley. But did you discuss that with your friends your Brazilian friends, the indigenous peoples?
Yes, not that topic, especially, but if I take all the conversations we had, it's very much that. Yeah, they're not worried about their lives. They're not even scared. I asked one time, "Are you scared?" Because they're getting shot at, and there's criminal fires, and it's very brutal what's happening. I'm going in September to visit them and to see what the money we raised did, and going to do like a small documentary between 2 tours in North America. I'll be flying to Brazil, so I'll be able to have more conversations and experiences, and I'd love to try maybe ayahuasca with some of these people.
Hey, we don't condone drugs here on Space Rock. So
No,
no. But on the other hand, Alex and I, it looks like water, but it isn't really, right? It's the only way we get through these things.
I'm very really looking forward to learn more from them, but I can see their attitude is completely towards their kids and the future of, you know, the survival of their way of life and the earth, and the relationship they have with earth and with nature. They are a tremendous example of human beings. They are a beautiful, bright example of what we could be. We don't need to do exactly that, but at least they don't impact nature in a negative way, and it's quite the opposite, actually. Just like the animals and the plants that live within the forest, they are part of a balance. If they hunt respectfully, they pray for the animal, and then they don't go hunt 2 times in the same place, for example. So there would be no trauma due to human activity in this. And this is something that is passed on from generation to generation. And it seems that these people don't have dreams of grandeur, like a big house, a big swimming pool, and a big car. Like a lot of people in our societies, they want absolution. They want everything: comfort, safety, you know, life. They want to live forever. And then we are a part of that society, so there's a struggle. We all want comfort, and we all want more things and bigger houses and stuff. But you sort of have to soak it in that it's not about that, and it's about, yeah, we're on a planet, we're part of a whole. Yeah, that spirit I got from them for sure.
Hmm.
You know, it's interesting, Joe, because at the start of the show, we were talking a little bit about what it was like for you early on. And one of the criticisms you said that you got was, well, people were saying, oh, well, you're just a hippie. And these days, you hear things like, oh, well, you're a snowflake or you're woke or whatever else. And one of these criticisms actually signify compassion, you know, thought for other people, you know, thought about the things around you and all that. And I suppose that's the thing that we really need to rally against, is this dismissal of what we could possibly learn from other people, you know, from other societies that have perhaps found better ways. You know, maybe there are some things we have to unlearn. And I guess it's forums like these that are so important for this very reason, because we need to share ideas. We need to break barriers down. So I've got to thank you and Hayley so much for your time tonight. This is such an important conversation, one that we have to keep on having over and over and over again, because it is the most important thing. Now, before you go, Mark, I got to put this over to you. You're the...
Yeah. So look, it's been a thrill, Joe. Thank you very much. And Hayley for coming back in again. So, and of course, Hayley, because you've been here before, you know what comes next. Joe is surprised by this. This is a dexterity test, but it's just a thing that we have. So we like to sort of use the Vulcan salute, live long and prosper, and then the horns for space and rocks, right? So it's kind of to get, but thanks very much.
Thank you so much.
And we would love to, you know, see you when the situation arises where we can travel again and see you. And we'd love to welcome you at one of our live events. You know, who knows? Gojira across the European Space Agency.
That was very inspiring, and I'm really, really happy that we had this conversation, and some beautiful thoughts. And definitely, I hope this will give hope to people that, you know, don't know what to do or what to think. And there is hope.
Yeah, and I'm hopeful that you'll have the sound of icebergs crashing, breaking off, because Hayley mentioned it somewhere as an introduction to a song at some point. Wouldn't that be cool?
Yes, absolutely.
So thank you both very much. It's been a huge pleasure, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye now.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Okay. Well then, Mark, so we solved the world's problems. Well done.
Well, you know, it's interesting. So over 50 episodes, we've talked about the environment in a number of times, with Hayley, of course, and with various artists. And you and I have talked about this, you know, this sort of dichotomy that we have. There's one thing to look outwards into the universe and kind of be a little bit fanboyish, and you know, me as much as anybody else, about the amazing things we discover about black holes and the surface of Mars. But we're all sort of symbiotic with this planet, and it's sort of crazy that we're in this position where we're messing our nest up so badly. It just seems so irresponsible. So long may the conversations continue. But, you know, again, we welcome people who are in the audience to sort of sit back and reflect, as I do. You know, I try to. What am I going to do now as a consequence of this conversation? I think it's important we do that, and fill in the spaces in between.
Absolutely. You know, Venus seems to have become incredibly topical recently. I mean, a great example of what looks like an environmental hellscape by human, you know, standards in many ways. I think perhaps one of the most critical ideas that's come across in this and in other episodes is there is no planet B. And I guess that's the thing that we really need to rail against, because it's a dangerous thought.
I just want to pitch forward something. I didn't want to bring it up with Hayley and Joe because we were mostly focusing on the oceans. But you mentioned Brian Eno, and I'll be taking part in an event with him next week, which is organised by my friend Andy Lawrence, Professor of Astronomy in Edinburgh. And that's about the mega constellations, about this sort of, you know, vastly growing number of low Earth orbit satellites, which many people can see at night. They affect astronomy. There's space debris problems. And then there's the other side, you know, that they can bring high-speed internet to people in remote locations. So we'll be having a discussion next Tuesday called Losing the Sky. If people want to Google that, it'll be interesting, because it not only about the science but also about the cultural aspects of it. And I know, next week you're going to be busy getting back on the bike as well. So I think we probably won't be having an episode of Uplink next week. But on Tuesday, at least, people can come over and listen to that one instead, Losing the Skies.
Indeed, and we put a link to our newsletter. You can also sign up at spacerocksofficial.com. We'll put news out about it because it sounds like a great event and important ideas. Yeah. And sharing those is what we're all about. Mark, it's ever an absolute pleasure. Congratulations on episode 50. And here's to the next 50.
Halfway to the century. Let's see when we get there.
Indeed. Be well.
Very good. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.